Mathieu from ShapeDiver, and today I'll talk about the advanced settings of the points input component. It's a second video about this component, so if you didn't see the first one, please go watch it first. In the first video, I showed how one can use the points input component of the ShapeDiver plugin to let users of online apps draw their own series of points or polylines in the online viewer. But in the first video, I didn't really play with constraints. By default, if you add this component, users will be able to draw points on the XY plane, the horizontal plane of the scene. But one can constrain the points to lie in a different plane or even on a piece of geometry of your scene. So I'll start by showing how one can change the plane constraint. Right, in this model, I have a profile curve for my vase, which is defined in the YZ plane. So I'll want to add the points input. I'll call it profile, for example. And in my case, I'll clear the plane constraint, which is the default one on the XY plane, and set a different one, in my case YZ. But I could set any plane in the, any orientation in the scene. I want YZ. I'll select this one, and I'll also define the default position of the points according to this test curve I have in my scene, and make sure the curve is open. And now I can connect it to my algorithm. Now, the second thing I'd like to do is to restrict those points to a grid, so to snap to grid points in my scene, so that the shape of the curve cannot get too crazy with really high curvatures. So I'd like to limit this to a grid structure. And here I have this option in the component to define a grid unit for snapping. By default, the grid unit is set to 0, which means that there's not going to be a grid in the viewer, and the planes can be placed freely. But if I define a unit, for example, 50 in my model, then when I start moving the point in the viewer, a grid is gonna appear, and the points are gonna be restricted to the points of this grid. I can show how it looks in the uploaded model. So if I start using my profile input here, I can see my points constrained to the YZ plane. And if I start to move one, the grid appears, and I am restricted to place the points on the vertices of this grid. Right, so I can rotate several. I can even use a shift button, select several points at the same time and move them in the scene, confirm, and that updates my base. Right, so that's the first way to constrain planes in the online scene. The second way is actually to use geometry that's already defined in the scene and to constrain users who pick points on this specific piece of geometry. So in my case, once I'm done doing my profile curve, I create in the scene a vase, and in order to be able to reference it as a constraint, what I do is that I use a GLTF2 display component. I give it a name, I call it scene, and I use the name attribute in my piece of geometry. So I call this one vase, the vase I create from the profile, and I add it to my scene, right? And now I can use a points input component, and in this points input component, I can call it geodesic. I can specify that so I can clear the plane constraint. That's not what I want. I'd like to set a geometry constraint. And the geometry constraints are defined using a point dot separated scheme, which is common to several components in the Grasshopper ShapeDiver plugin. In my case, in order to reference this piece of geometry, I'll use the name of the GLTF2 component dot the name of the piece of geometry inside, so the attribute, which is vase in my case. So scene.vase. And if I do that, it's going to restrict users on the online app to pick points on this piece of geometry. In my case, I'm going to let my users pick a maximum of 2 points to define a geodesic curve between those 2 points. And I'll use those points to drive the generation of a pipe, a geodesic pipe on the surface. So the first and second points here. And let's say I pick some default values for those points. So if I pick here, just to test, default value, one here, one here, and here we go. All good. I'll actually remove the default value. I'd like to keep it empty by default and let users pick the 2 points they want in the scene. So now I'm ready. I can upload this definition again. And in the result, I still have my profile here that I can define. And then I can also use the points input called geodesic in the scene to let users pick 2 points on this mesh from my scene and draw a geodesic curve between those points. Right. I can also, of course, move them to pick them. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Please write on the forum or visit our documentation help center if you have more questions. And I hope you create beautiful applications with this really powerful new feature of the ShapeDiver.